All right, welcome back from lunch break, everyone. Friday the 28th. We are continuing work on the Miscellaneous Elections Bill. And so we're touching on two pieces today. We're talking more RCV, but we're also talking about fusion hybrid candidates and some buckets in that area. So what I wanted to do, because they are two big pieces, and we broke this into, I want to break it into two distinct conversations. So first and foremost, I want to start with the fusion piece because we are joined here with our colleagues, two representatives. I want to be conscious of their time and their committee work. And we have the provisions that are in the bill, the miscellaneous bill, but there was also some other bills floating around, which Representative Hooper, was it H.474, correct? Which we are also considering for inclusion in this bill. So these are all components of the general conversation around this. So I want to forego bringing up Director Sheehan and just let our witnesses start to offer testimony right now, and then we can circle back to the Secretary of State's feedback on this one after the fact. If everybody finds that amenable, I'll call up the first witness. We good? Mm-hmm. All right, cool. We will start with Representative Logan.
Okay. Hi folks. I'm finding that I don't know everyone.
All right, well, we'll do a little round robin then for you.
Thank you.
Representative Matt Byron, Chair of the Committee, Addison 3, Northwest Addison County.
Representative Lisa Hango, Franklin 5, Vice Chair.
Representative Lucy Boyden, 103, Cambridge and Waterville.
Hi, Representative Sandy Fensnell, represented from Bennington 1, Rutland, D&B, Mount Tabor, Dorset, and Peru.
Michael Morgan, Grand Isle, Chittenden District, which is Albert, Isle of Mont, North Hero, Grand Isle, South Hero, and West Milton.
Hooper Burlington.
Hi.
I know him.
V.L. Coffin, Windsor 2, Cavendish, Weathersfield, Baltimore.
Hooper Randolph, also represent Brookfield, Braintree, Granville, Rockford.
Katie, just South Burlington. The other one.
Shea Waters, Evans, Charlotte, and Heinsberg.
Great. And I'm Representative Kate Logan from Chittenden 16 in Burlington. So I guess I'll jump in. I'd say today it seems like what we're talking about is our complexities regarding elections in a majoritarian, also known as a winner-takes-all or first-past-the-post system, where an elected official represents a geographic district. So it's well documented that a majoritarian system fails to provide fair representation for voters in a couple of ways, at least. First, the geographic constraints of district-based voting means that election outcomes favor the party whose voters are more evenly geographically distributed across districts. So this can be further exacerbated by politically motivated gerrymandering of districts. So votes in districts that are heavily in favor of one party simply count for less overall or are wasted votes. So voters who live in areas where there's a high concentration of a party have less influence over the total number of representatives elected with that party designation. So that party ends up being underrepresented through the representative system. Another challenge is that it leads to a two-party system because competing for 50% plus one of the votes disincentivizes more than one party because two parties can more easily compete for half of the votes. So this discourages diversity of political thought and political representation. So in the US, for example, you have to choose to be a Republican or a Democrat, or choose not to affiliate because neither of the two parties provides representation for your political identity. So the recommended approach to address those failures of majoritarian systems is to adopt proportional representation, and most liberal democracies have done that. The US has not chosen to make that change, so the elections policies that we're discussing today are centered around ideas, things that aim to make majoritarian systems as capable of accommodating political diversity as possible and offer more representation to voters. So ranked choice voting allows for more than 2 candidates representing more than 2 parties to participate in elections without risk of splitting the vote in a way that results in a candidate winning an election who doesn't represent the will of the majority of voters. So I would give as an example for that the 2024 lieutenant governor election, where third-party voters in an amount larger than the difference between the 2 top vote getters, made the difference in that election, and then that party issued a letter the next day saying, oh, we want our votes to be counted for this candidate, not that, and we're like, it's too late. So if voters had had the opportunity to rank candidates, that election might have had a different result. Two bites at the apple, which I think is one of the policy, one of the bill, Representative Hooper's bill, is the way it currently works in our state is that it allows a candidate to seek a major party nomination in a party primary, but if they lose, then allows them to go on to the general election with another party's nomination or as an independent. And then finally, fusion voting is another one of these policies, and allows candidates to affiliate with more than one party by earning more than one party's nomination. I would argue that this allows a broader diversity of political representation. And then the order of party affiliation is the candidate's choice, and then that makes a difference about which party you end up caucusing with in the legislature. There were 39 fusion candidates on the ballot in 2024, 12 Democratic progressives, eight or nine progressive Democrats, Republican Democrats, Democrat Republicans, Republican Libertarians. So there were a range of fusion candidates in 2024. I serve as a progressive Democrat. I ran in the progressive primary and then elected, and then I was nominated by the Progressive Party through caucus, and then elected in the general election to run as a progressive Democrat. So I can speak to my own experience as a progressive Democrat. That's a really intentional political identity for myself. I'm from Chicago, moved to Vermont from Oregon after living there for about a decade, and I've been a registered Democrat since I was old enough to vote, and I voted in our national elections as a Democrat in every election. We don't have a third party option at the national level. In fact, I strongly discourage a third party movement in federal politics right now. The stakes are a little bit too high. I wish we had ranked choice voting. I wish we had proportional representation in our country. I think it would improve representation for voters who feel isolated and unrepresented in the current political environment that we're in. For me, being a progressive Democrat, I think, is a really good description of my political identity. In any other state, I would just be called a progressive Democrat, and I'd be a Democrat, but I'd be caucusing with the progressives or something like that. So I do appreciate the fact that we have this hybrid system that allows constituents to have a different political identity, different party identity, but not completely disrupt the two-party system. I do think it creates tension, and I think that's part of why we're here today is some of the tensions and that it does create, allowing this kind of fusion identity, a hybrid identity. But that to me seems preferable to a lot of voters not feeling like they have any political representation whatsoever. And I would say that is particularly true in my district. In municipal elections, voters in my district vote 80% progressive. They've chosen to be represented by Democrats for a very long time. In our most recent Democratic primary, in a 2-seat district, I campaigned as a progressive Democrat. I campaigned first time around as a progressive Democrat. I made it very clear while I was campaigning that I intended to run in the general as a progressive Democrat. In this most recent Democratic primary, I was the top vote getter for a 2-seat district. So I think that my constituents feel represented by this political identity. I am happy to talk about the problems, though, that are created, and I certainly recognize them and would not discourage us from trying to solve the issues that have arisen. So happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, so let's pause there before we get to there.
Yeah.
And just see if anybody has any questions for Representative Logan on the first shot of testimony. Representative Waters-Evans.
Thanks. When you say progressive Democrat, does that mean just you have P/D after your name on the ballot?
It does mean that,
Okay.
but it means I also think of myself as a progressive Democrat.
Yeah. Oh, yes, I know. I'm just
Yeah.
talking about like the logistics of like an election
Yes,
itself.
PD.
And the process. Okay,
Yep.
so it's PD.
Mm-hmm.
And you said you ran in the progressive primary or the Democrat primary?
I ran in the Democratic primary.
Okay. Was there a progressive primary?
There was, but the Democratic primary in our elections always includes federal elections. So everybody votes in the Democratic primary.
So you felt like you would have been underrepresented on the progressive ballot?
Oh yeah, progressives were voting on the Democratic ballot
Okay.
because, again, there isn't a progressive of ballot candidates to vote for.
Okay.
At the federal level.
Yes.
Yes, and we're always doing federal elections in our primaries. Yeah. So I was nominated by caucus.
For the
Right.
general election?
No, in the
Wait.
primary cycle by the Progressive Party, I was nominated as a progressive through caucus. Through a caucus of the
So that you were
Progressive
on
Party.
both ballots?
No,
Oh,
because I was
after. Okay, got
I
it.
was nominated, yeah, so I was nominated by caucus before the primary was held, but
Okay.
the paperwork doesn't need to be filed until after the primary election.
Representative White.
Just curious, with 2022 having not been a presidential election year, which primary you ran under?
Democrat. Yeah, there's up ballot races every 2 years at the federal level, Senate,
But, yeah,
Congress, president,
it's just more highlighted with the presidential.
definitely, yeah, much higher voter turnout.
Representative Hooper of Burlington, then Nugent.
Now you have me puzzled because my recollection is not the last election, but the one before, which Representative Williams is talking about. There were 3 ballots for the primary. One dedicated to progressives, one dedicated to Democrats, one dedicated to Republicans.
Yeah.
It sticks in my mind because I was taking ballots around as a justice of the peace, and a guy said, I want the progressive ballot. And he said, I don't recognize anybody on here. And I said, well, they're all over on the Democratic ballot. He said, why? And I couldn't answer. So there were options, even though there were statewide candidates available for each individual party to pick a ballot.
Yeah, there were, yeah. And I would say also, I think the way that Democrats pick their candidates also leads to, like, if you want to be a progressive Democrat, for example, you have to run in the Democratic primary, because there is no caucus process for nominating folks to serve as PDs.
Representative Waterside.
So say there was, this is hypothetical, so let's say you had to choose P or D. Do you, just what are your thoughts about going about the process of choosing which ballot you would be on, what you think, it seems like your party is more you caucus with the Progressive Party, right, in the State House?
Yeah, I'm not given an option to caucus with both.
You can't caucus with both, you're saying?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not allowed to.
So then, given that, and we're talking about you only because this is, you know what I mean, it could be
Yeah.
any one of
No,
a number of
yeah.
candidates, not just specifically you.
Yeah.
But what do you think what would the effects of this be on the elections process and the availability to voters of giving them the options that they want and need? Would it?
I mean, I think that not having fusion, I mean, I would find that disappointing, because I think it would be strange for me not to consider myself a Democrat, first of all. There is no National Progressive Party, so then I'm not, yeah. It's already strange that I'm not allowed to progress, to caucus with Democrats as the person who won my Democratic primary. But to not have that clear identity for my constituents would be strange for me. And I do think that there are a large number of voters who like the hybrid identity. So I'm not sure whose problem it is to get rid of the hybrid identity, like what that particular issue is, because it does seem to be something that it helps, I would say, folks who don't feel completely comfortable with the Democratic Party but end up voting on the Democratic primary ballot because of the up ballot races, feel like they have more representation.
All right, we are going to go Representative Nugent, then Hooper of Burlington, then Pisnall.
I'm just wondering what you think about the fact that, like, the U.S. was set up as a two-party system. Like, we're not set up as a parliamentary system where you can have coalition governments of different groups. And the argument that if you have more than that, you actually risk people not getting representation by majority interests, and it can be kind of like go extreme or small, very small representation.
I mean, in countries where they do have proportional representation, you have to rule by coalition. Generally, if there isn't a majority, if no party captures the majority.
Parliamentary structures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Totally
I mean, in a majoritarian system, I think what you more often see is people not affiliating with a party if they don't feel like a party represents them, and sometimes not voting. And I think, so yeah, offering an option to have more political diversity without completely undermining an individual election, I think is one of the things that hybrid or fusion voting allows for. So that you don't end up in three-way races, for example, where you have a progressive and a Democrat in a general election, and splitting the majority of the votes, and so then a Republican being elected, for example, which has happened once in 2016. when there were 3 candidates running in a general.
Yeah, before we get to Representative Cooper, I want to slide in for a second. So, but the state of Vermont does have 3 major parties.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yes.
And was like a desire, I believe, with the intent of doing so. Was it not necessarily being trying to like guide an electoral outcome that would result in less Republican victories, but actually just having more options to the total electorate?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. No, because you're just speaking to the fact of Republican.
Oh, I'm saying
voters.
fusion, running as a fusion candidate allows for progressive candidates to run in races where they have strong support from Democratic voters in their district, and then go on to a general where it's head-to-head between a DP or PD versus a Republican versus a 3-way race in a general. The last time it happened was in 2016, and the votes were split, the majority of votes were split between a progressive and a Democrat, and a Republican won the race. And I would argue as well that we saw that similarly in the lieutenant governor election, where a minor third party earned over 10,000 votes, and the vote differential between the top 2 vote getters was, around 6,000 votes.
Representative Cooper of Burlington and Representative Pismo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for stealing my question.
Apologies, sir. Apologies.
But that's the kind of the elephant in the room here. We're dealing with a 2-party system on a federal level, and we're not considering the federal level at this point. We're dealing with our state,
Yeah.
where we have 3 distinct parties.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to put a marker in for the Secretary of State's, but I don't think that you can run in more than one primary.
No, you can't. But you can be nominated by more than one party.
Yeah, and that's sort of where I go with the next step of this conversation, but we'll get into that, I guess.
Thank you. My question is, so the state primaries every 2 years, there's an option to have a run as a progressive by taking out a petition and being nominated onto that petition.
Yep.
If you feel that you want proper representation of your voters and you feel there's a large progressive contingency in your district, why you wouldn't go that avenue instead of doing a fusion? That you wouldn't just do like an independent does, run as an independent, get petition to sign, to signatures to run, that you wouldn't run as a progressive and put your name on the progressive ballot? This is my question. Could you do have that option every 2 years to do that as a state primary?
Right. But in order to vote in up-ballot elections, you have to pull a Democratic primary ballot. So if you want to vote for the congressional primary or the presidential primary, you have to pull a Democratic ballot.
Could you write in?
Yes.
Yeah, you could.
So, I mean, if you're astute enough to be aware of the 3-party makeup, I would assume one would be aware of who the candidates were.
Yeah, and if there was some process for becoming a progressive Democrat, earning the Democratic nomination of running as a straight P in the general election, I think that that would be a perfectly reasonable way to go about doing things. But you can't become a fusion candidate after a general election.
No, and I would just like to add that this last presidential election was a true indicator of people pulling their non-traditional ballot that they normally would have pulled based on their beliefs to do a write-in campaign for somebody else. And so that option is there. I think you are what you are, and you should run what you are, and if you campaign, you can get people to write you in on their ballot as well.
Any other questions? Or did we move into the second bucket of representatives' testimony? Please proceed.
Oh.
Oh, I thought you had more.
Oh, yeah, no, I can speak to any of the other issues that you'd like. No, but that is my testimony because I was asked to speak to Fusion
Okay, understood.
candidacy.
Okay, so we'll hit the pause button there on the other stuff if you want to remain with us, we can get to
Sure.
those portions. Yes.
Yeah, no, but I am happy to talk about 2 bites at the apple or ranked choice voting.
Oh, you know what? So let's hold the ranked choice voting. If you want to speak to the 2 bites of the apple, I think that's relevant to this conversation.
Okay, absolutely. So yeah, like I said, 2 bites at the apple allows a candidate to seek major party nomination in a party primary, but if they lose, allows them to go on to the general election with another party's nomination or as an independent. So I'd say that this is like yet another way of getting around the restrictions that exist in a majoritarian party system, where both people running for office, but also potentially voters might not feel that a major party candidate adequately represents them. And I could see the benefit particularly in, so somebody could elect to try to earn a party nomination and then go on to run even if they lost a party primary. This is more of just answering questions. I know that this particularly, I think, is brought up, and I know that Representative Duke is here to provide testimony on her experience with a similar candidate running for the Democratic primary election, seeking to be a Fusion candidate, lost the Democratic primary, had received the nomination of the Progressive Party in their district through caucus, and then went on to the general to run as a progressive. So Representative Duke had to run against the same candidate twice. I think that's the most recent example. I mean, my testimony on this would be if folks want to restrict running under a party label in the general election after losing a party primary, I suppose that might be one way of resolving the issue, but this is to me, this allows the most possibility of representation if a candidate really feels like the candidates who will be on the general election ballot after the primary process are not providing adequate representation for the district, that they should be allowed to run in both the primary and the general. I'm agnostic on the party designation, personally.
Representative Hoover?
Well, we're back to the conversation about 3 major parties in the state.
Yep.
And I think the problem that I see in the resolve that I came up with 117 was we're merging 2 opportunities that probably when they were created were not intended to be merged. And that is if a major party does not have a candidate for a position, they can at caucus fill that position with another individual. I don't think it was ever envisioned that a placeholder would be put on the ballot for one party, and then if the person running in another primary lost, they would then fill that placeholder position to run again. That seems like almost an abuse of the system, which is why I call it the 2 bites, because you're getting an election view and a ballot, and you are denied, your candidacy is denied, so you go someplace else for another bite at the apple, and that's not something that is afforded really any other candidate aside from the third party one, I think, historically.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think this is where differences in how candidates are selected as a nominee. There are differences among the parties. Progressives nominate their candidates by caucus. So even if somebody is running in a primary on the progressive ballot, but hasn't received the nomination of the progressive caucus in their district, then the party will not support that candidate in the general election. In general, the progressive party doesn't run placeholder candidates while their nominated, caucus nominated candidate runs in the Democratic primary. I know that candidate wanted the fusion, wanted to be a fusion candidate, and then they lost the Democratic primary. I don't know if you've considered calling them for testimony. That might be difficult for them. I don't know. But that was their choice. It was their choice. They already had the progressive nomination. It was their choice whether or not they chose to run in the general. It does give them the option to run. Yeah, this does, the way that that worked out does give them the option to run both in a party primary and then run under another major party. And anyone could do that.
Any other questions for right now?
Good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Representative. Yeah, if you have the time, please feel free to, well, we are going to speak RCD, so you will speak a little bit later.
Okay.
But I do want to bring Representative Duke up next.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Good to see you, Representative.
Nice to see you as well.
Is this your first time in here in a formal capacity?
Yes, it is.
All right. Well, let's do a quick round of intros again. Representative Matt Byron, Chair of the Committee, Addison 3, Northwest Addison County.
Representative Lisa Hango, Franklin 5, northwestern corner of the state with Canada.
Lucy Boyden, Lynn 103, Cambridge, Waterville.
Sandy Pincinel, Bennington, Rutland 1, DMV, Dorset, Mount Tabor, Land Grove, and Peru.
Michael Morgan, Grand Isle, Chittenden District, the true northwest corner of the state, Albert, North Hero, Isle Mott, Grand Isle, South Hero, and West Milton. Just picking on
V.L. Coffin, Windsor 2, Cavendish, Weathersfield, and Baltimore.
Hooper, Brookfield, Braintree, Randolph, Granville, Roxbury.
Kate Nugent, South Burlington.
Shea Waters, Evans, Charlotte, and Heinsberg.
Well, for the record, I'm Representative Abby Duke from Burlington. And yes, I'm looking at my two fellow Burlington representatives here. That, for the record, it is the best district in Burlington.
Mr. Chair, I move that the
Testimony be struck.
Please hold the motion.
So I'm here I'm gonna kind of be the person to kind of walk you through sort of boots on the ground experience of politics in Burlington. So Chittenden 17 is a nice rectangular, mostly rectangular part of Burlington that runs from Waterfront Park up to Leddy Park and then inland a bit. Also includes the Intervale. So I've got the agricultural part of Burlington as well as the largest residential development in the state in the same district, which is pretty cool. Only single member district in Burlington. It includes part of the old North End and part of the new North End, essentially. So I'm gonna start this story in 2020 and then rapidly move forward to 2024. So the first part of the story will help you understand how I got appointed, and then I'll talk about my experience running for the seat. So in 2020, the incumbent in this district was Jean O'Sullivan, and Emma Mulvaney-Stanek ran against her in the 2020 Democratic primary, and beat her in the primary, and then got the progressive nomination, and then ran as a PD in the general election, winning election, unopposed. So then she served as a progressive, and then did the same thing in 2022. So ran in the Democratic primary, at that time unopposed, and then served as a progressive and was always caucused with the progressives and served as the progressive leader. So when she resigned, after she was elected mayor of Burlington, she resigned her seat And then the standard practice is the governor appoint somebody from the same party as the person who resigned. It's not required, but it is standard practice. And so the Democratic Party put up 3 names. I was on one of them, and the Progressive Party put up 3 names. The rationale being the person who had resigned had run, in fact, beaten an incumbent in the Democratic primary. Therefore, it was appropriate for the Democrats to put up nominees as well as the Progressives. So Governor Scott, interviewed, and I believe the 2 finalists came down to me and a progressive named Miss Aloisi, and so he chose me to take the seat. And I was seated with a week to go in the session. I've met many of you then, but so I was here for 5 days in the spring. And then, by the end of May, everybody knows you have to file to run if you're running in a primary. So I filed, and Missa also filed as a progressive to run in the Democratic primary. So, okay, that's fine. That's as you've heard, that's generally how it works in Burlington. And so I did all the things. I raised money, did the campaigning, got volunteers, did all the things you do, and then leading up to the election day and the primary, and Missa was telling people at the polls, it's okay if I don't win, I'm going to run in a general election as a progressive. So, maybe I'll win, but if I don't, it's okay, I'll still be here. And I was like, oh gosh, really? And told multiple people, and that is indeed what she did. So I beat her 60% to 40% in the primary. And then I think the deadline was 6 days later, you could file as another party or or you couldn't file as an independent. You in order to run as an independent, you would have to file before the primary. You could do that, but you would have to be thinking about it a week before the primary. So if you lose because she lost in the Democratic primary, her options were it's over or run as a progressive. You couldn't run as an independent if you hadn't thought of it the week before. So 6 days later, she was put up as the progressive nominee. So we started it all over again. So it was a little bit like Groundhog Day. I raised the same amount of money. I did pretty much the same amount of work. So I continually ran against the same person for 5 months. Basically, I did take a little break after the primary. I was like, all right, I'm gonna take a couple weeks off. So then the general election came up, and I beat her in the general election 62% to 38%. I have a few comments about it. One is it created a lot more work. I literally had to do twice the work and raise twice the amount of money against the same person. If it had been a different person from the Progressive Party, if it had been somebody from the Republican Party, I would have welcomed the challenge, but I didn't really welcome it because I didn't really want to run again against the same person. The voters didn't like it. People were like, you can do that? Like, literally, they were like, oh, really? They also were just confused, like, didn't we just do this? There was, so I think my concerns about it are, number one, is I think it's not great for the candidates to have to do that. It's only gonna make it harder to recruit people to do it. It takes more work, more money into the whole system. Voters don't like it. And third, I think it encourages kind of gaming the system, for a better way of putting it. And we heard from Representative Logan, and I've heard this from other progressive politicians. They talk about identity, political identity, and to me, it's not really identity, it's about the team. Like there's a Democratic team, there's a progressive team, and there's a Republican team, and we collaborate and we work together, and there's a lot of overlap. But the Progressive Party is not a faction of the Democratic Party. The Progressive Party is a third party, it's a separate party. And I think that when somebody runs, go back to like the primary, if you are running in the Democratic primary, the Democratic Party does not help you, right? Because if it's a contested primary, and it's totally makes sense, right? Their bylaws are, we do not help one Democratic primary candidate over another. But the Progressive Party helps the progressive candidate in the Democratic Party. So there's this, that's part of the gamesmanship. So people resent it, people don't like it. Democrats feel like they're being kind of taken advantage of in the Democratic Party system. So that is, that's my story. So I can answer any questions, kind of talk through any of those issues if that's helpful.
No, absolutely. Did I see your hand? Yes, Representative Larson.
I know that you don't know everything about all of the elections, but I'm wondering
Yeah.
just your personal experience and from what you know about Burlington in this. Has this ever happened, but with a progressive, running in the Republican, primary first and then running as a progressive or vice versa, or is it?
That I know of, the only cross-party sort of primary like this that I've seen at least is progressives running in the Democratic primary. There may be examples I don't know about, but that's what I've seen.
So I just before I get to your other point, so when we had this conversation 2 years ago, now Lieutenant Governor Rogers, we brought in for testimony, and I asked a very similar question.
Yeah.
It always seems to be the P to the D or the R to the D, and I asked
Yeah.
him if he was aware of anybody who PR'd, or is it all just kind of around the edges of the D? And he also could not think of any instance of that, Representative.
I think I know of one that happened, I want to say around 10 years ago, or so in Johnson. I don't know if they were actively recognized by the Progressive Party, I don't remember which party they ran in, whether it was R or P, but they advertised themselves as a progressive Republican.
I am aware of some folks, and we'll get back to that in a second, that did like, what is it referred to, full drip, right?
Yeah.
Democrat, Republican, Independent,
Oh, yeah.
Progressive, and the full drip, if I recall. So, okay, any other direct questions from the member?
That was my question.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what one of the things with this representative, right? Like, it just seems that, you know, and it one of the ways I've looked at this over time is those of us who are here in this room, whether we are elected, we are policy professionals, we work with an executive branch, we are like deep cut political nerds. We totally get the nuance of these things, right? But the outside looking in for the constituency and the electorate, for a lot of the baseline voters, is the brand by with which you choose to run is a way of sort of like an opening way of marketing yourself as a political product for them to begin to understand. And to me, that toggling in and out, a P to the D, a D to the B, an R to the R, or R to the D, whatever it is, it kind of confuses that for them as they're trying to understand what they're voting for. And that's just sort of like, you know, we are going out as candidates, literature, radio, whatever it may be, these contact points, and we are trying to identify ourselves to policy concepts, to, you know, a social structure or whatever it may be, right? There is this association to that letter as sort of an opening touch point of understanding for the consumer of the political brand who is our voters. And I have found that the way this has been used as a tool, especially in the last 10 or 15 years, 10 especially, it really muddies the ability for the voter to truly understand the political product that's being put before them. So, I really appreciate your insight on this. And did that
Yeah, I have
Maybe
a question, but I forgot what it was. Hold please.
all day?
Alright, we might have to move on.
That's fine. That's
What
fine.
happens?
Oh, in
It's
there.
Friday afternoons.
There's like a wind blowing through here right now.
Yeah. Are you still capable of sticking around for a little bit, member?
I can stick around for a little bit.
Okay.
We're
Just in case the question
yeah.
resurfaces.
I can stick around for 10 minutes or so.
Sounds
That
wonderful.
helps.
Sounds
Yeah.
wonderful. Representative Hooper.
So Hoop of Burlington has his own bill, and that's separate from this.
Yes, that is H.474 that speaks to the second bite of the apple concept within the bill that we have listed today. That is just no more fusion candidates, pretty much in a nutshell, like how you file in the primary. That's it. No hybrids.
I remembered.
See, a bunch at a time.
Thank you.
Representative Waters Evans, then we have Representative Hooper
I'm on it.
of
So-
Randolph.
So in the second race.
Yeah.
Did it seem like a continuation of the first race, or did you, philosophically and or did it seem like two separate things were?
No, the only real difference was that the literature was updated for a different date and that it was general election, not primary. It was the same messaging, same stump speeches, same.
Yeah.
Same.
And
Except the difference was people paid more attention, right? Because it's a general election. So, and that was the argument, was that only 25% of voters came to the primary, so, more voters should have a choice. But, I would argue then you knew that before it started. Like, no, we did not have any, we had what we expected for a voter turnout in a primary, and we had what we expected for a turnout in the general election. So that decision, I think, could have been made to just run in the general election, and that is when, right, that is when the majority of the, more people were gonna be voting. So, but no, there was virtually no difference in the messaging between the primary and the general.
thanks.
Representative brought up my bill, which however this gets incorporated or not incorporated, I want to be clear that my issue is not how anything runs within the party structure at this point, except for the fact that when you go before the electorate once and are turned down for the position, there should not be another avenue through the party structure or another party structure that allows you to access the ballot again. That's the two-bite concept. You get to lose an election once, whether it's the primary or the general, but not both.
I think the tricky thing is, one could be a Republican with some ideas that are considered Democrat or progressive ideas, or one could be a Democrat with some ideas that are progressive, align with progressives, or, there's always gonna be some mix in between that. And for better or worse, we're in a system where you declare a party or you don't, and you run as an independent, which is also an option for you. So I feel like if you're making that choice to run as that party, then it's the understanding that no one is an absolute only Democrat, because there's not even such a thing, right? But that's where you choose to place yourself. And so that then saying, okay, well, that didn't work out for me in this party, I'm just gonna try it with another one, then that seems a little disingenuous and confusing to voters, only because then what are you standing for? Are you standing as someone who just wants to win an election, or are you standing as somebody who is aligning your political philosophy and your beliefs and ideas with a particular party? Because you don't have to choose a party, right? You can not choose.
Well, I defer to Representative Rizal. When you take the signature form out to get your 50, 100, 200, whatever you're running for signatures, you fill a little blank in the top that says, I'm running in a particular. And I think,
Party.
to Mr. Chairman's comment before, it's confusing to the electorate to have, oh yeah, I remember that person that came to my door, they said they were gonna run the Democratic primary. Oh, but they're not a Democrat. Elections are confusing enough.
Yeah, and I think, that sort of concept about what is a political party, right? And to me, a political party is not it's not a political identity so much as a caucus, if you will, or a team that you're a part of and that you're working with. Political parties exist in order to create structure, to support candidates, and to put forth planks and platforms, right? And so that is something that I think is challenging in the method of running as a PD, with this idea of as a political identity, by having it sort of running in the Democratic primary in order to signal your political identity without actually saying, I'm going to be caucusing and working with this political team. Does that make sense? Yeah. So anyway, that's what I find challenging, and I think voters find it very confusing. And I certainly found that, would talk to people and they're like, you again? Like, what's going on? Like, didn't you win? You know?
Representative Hooper of Randolph.
I'm curious for either representative's perspective on whether or not you think the election guide plugs into this conversation in a healthy fashion. You familiar with?
The Secretary of State's election guide? Does it plug in?
Seems like it might help with the confusion part.
Yeah, no, there's really good information in the guide. So I think if the electorate chooses to look at it and learn about candidates, I think all the different methods of getting information out about candidates is great, right? And a certain percentage of the electorate will read it, and we have a lot of very engaged voters in our district that read that, and read other methods, and talk to us at the doors, and try to make really good decisions about who to support.
Do you ever have Republicans running up there? Is that...
We haven't had a Republican for a while.
Have they ever get Republican opponents, or is that old list?
We have. It's been a couple of years, but yeah, 6 years maybe since there's been a Republican run. There was,
Anything else for Representative Duke? Okay.
would it be helpful if I stick around for a few minutes? Or
If you
do
have the
think we're
time,
good?
sure, perhaps something will pop up. Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, we are gonna be moving this bill when we get back, so we're trying to
Okay,
have as much of an in-depth conversation today as possible.
okay. I'll stay for a few minutes, but I gotta get back to
Whatever you have available on your clock. Thank you.
Sounds good, thank you.
Yes, please. Okay. Good. It looked like you were prepared.
Oh, no.
Or not.
Does anyone have?
Yeah. On the fusion candidate concept, I mean, this is something that's really a more of a political conversation than what the Secretary of State delves into. So that's why I was kind of looking at Representative Logan to see if she wanted to speak to the testimony that was just given before we shift to the RCV conversation.
I appreciate that, thank you.
So, Representative Kate Logan. So I think, the story that Representative Duke shared is really, not my own to respond to. I do.
But I do want to say that is not an isolated incident that has happened on numerous occasions throughout the course. So
I think I don't actually know of any other cases where a progressive ran in a Democratic primary and then ran in the general as a progressive. I don't know. I've asked. But I will say that I think one of the conflicts that happened early on in the primary was that the party was, the Democratic Party was providing resources to now Representative Duke. And to my knowledge, the Progressive Party doesn't provide resources to primary candidates. That's typically not the pattern. Or at least I'm not aware of it. I think folks who consider themselves very active within the Progressive Party probably volunteer for the candidate. And I know that in my primary, my initial primary, for example, in 2022, the Democratic Party contributed, I think, approximately $8,000 to my opponent.
I do want to be aware of the clock. We do have a guest online who is here to speak to RCV for 2 p.m. So let's keep this piece tight right here.
Just a really quick one.
Yes,
Yes or no?
Hoover.
Do you think that it's fair to classify the progressive party an extension of the Democratic left wing?
I wouldn't call it an extension. I mean, if we're in a majoritarian system, it's winner take all, one candidate wins. There is no proportional representation, so having a third major party is a very awkward fit within a majoritarian system. I think progressives certainly generally come from a background as being a Democrat and then elect to go further left. So I'd say that most progressives consider themselves being further left of the Democratic Party. But I mean, we always are going to be in reference to the two major parties in the United States because it's a majoritarian system and it funnels us into a two-party system. So having a third major party will never be comfortable. And I think fusion is one of the ways that Vermont has developed in order to sort of address that tension between the fact that at the national level, two-party system, everywhere, majoritarian elections.
But didn't fusion exist before the progressives did?
Yeah,
Oh, certainly. Yes.
yeah. So it wasn't about the Progressive Party.
Right.
It was about the fact that we're in a majoritarian system, and that that gives you two options for your political identification, and for the sake of being able to have more than two parties, fusion is a good option. You can refer yourself as being more aligned with one of the two major parties.
I have one question here before we get to our guests on the RCV conversations, because I really need to get to him.
Yep.
I want to go back to something you said before. You said that the progressives don't resource candidates in the primaries?
Yeah, not that I'm aware of.
Okay. So, am I taking from that running as a Democrat in the primary is to attain resources and then?
No.
Is there I'd be interested to hear why the progressives don't, and this is not necessarily a question for you, this is a question for committee for further testimony.
Yeah.
When we talk more about this, when we get back to get an understanding about the resourcing or perceived under-resourcing of candidates. So I'd like members to kind of dog-ear that one to touch on later. So I thought that was an interesting nugget. Okay. Thank you very much, Representative. We are going to get to RCV, but I want to speak with our guest here.
Yeah.
He's been incredibly patient with us.
Thanks so much for your time.
Yes.
Thank you.
Is it Josh or Wood?
Tell us which one.
Mr. Daniels.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Great to be with you all. My
Thank you
name.
so kindly for your patience.
Oh, no problem. I'm glad to watch the earlier conversation. Happy to be with you all again. I was physically in Vermont the last two legislative sessions when this issue was discussed. It's the idea of using ranked choice elections in the partisan presidential primary process, and I come to you from really the child of Vermont, the state of Utah. As you might know, our founder, the founder of
Yes,
Utah,
I am
was born
aware
in
of the
Vermont.
latest, sir. Yes, please proceed.
We're the extension of Vermont in Utah. But I'm the former county clerk and auditor for a county called Utah County. So I was in charge of election administration in that county. It's the second largest county in Utah. It's similar in population to the state of Vermont. We have 720,000 people and only 2 sheets of ice upon which my kids can play hockey, which is where I spend a lot of my time. I wish we had dozens of hockey rinks like you all enjoy in Vermont. One of the things that we did in Utah County is we implemented some of the first ranked choice elections in the state for our municipalities. And there was a long history of ranked choice voting in Utah because our political parties would actually use ranked choice voting for the nominating contests that they would conduct at their respective state political party conventions. And that experience was really useful because oftentimes, as you might know, in a primary, you can get a crowded field of candidates. And if you think about a party like an ice cream flavor, you've got the team vanilla, and team chocolate. The primary is which version of chocolate or which version of vanilla the party wants to advance as their nominee. So then you get these bitter fights between French vanilla, classic vanilla, and vanilla bean, and you beat each other up to figure out which version of vanilla you want to advance as your party's nominee. If you think about, for example, in the Republican primary for president in 2016, there was a very crowded field. Ted Cruz notably won the Iowa caucus, but Trump won the New Hampshire primary, and they went back and forth with these different states. But all the while, those that were winning the state were winning with a very small amount of votes, maybe 15, 20, 30% of the vote, when other candidates, upwards of a dozen presidential candidates at times, would peel off 1 or 2 or 3% of the vote. And this does not give the party a really clear understanding of how the party voters might coalesce behind one particular nominee if their favorite candidate really couldn't win. So if you were on team Fred Thompson from Tennessee, and Fred Thompson only gets 1% in the caucus, where would those voters coalesce behind in the 2 or 3 or 4 leading contenders in that primary process? This is where ranked choice voting can be useful. So our experience in Utah in actually implementing these elections was actually quite smooth. We used a very similar ES&S system for election administration as you have in Vermont in many of your localities. And we were able to use existing registered and nationally certified election systems to run ranked choice balloting and ranked choice tabulation. We heard a lot of different concerns from people in the community, like, well, maybe the ballot is confusing. We actually did a lot of surveying and focus grouping and actually used sample ranked choice ballots with different populations in our community. For example, we ran ranked choice elections for high school student council elections and would figure out how the students reacted to the ballot and see if there were concerns. We even took ranked choice ballots to assisted living centers in our community and gave them out to the residents, had them vote on a ranked choice ballot, and gave them 0 instructions and 0 background. Our aim was to see organically what types of problems might arise. Much to our surprise, the residents found the concept of ranking options 1 through 5 quite intuitive and had very few questions or problems and were able to fill out the ballots just fine. After conducting municipal elections in Utah using ranked choice, we also surveyed voters that had participated and got their feedback and had overwhelming support for the use of ranked choice. Over 80% favored it or wanted it to be used in other types of elections. So our experience was satisfactory in terms of utilizing and implementing ranked choice voting. And if any of you have questions about the specifics of implementing or administering a ranked choice election, I'd be happy to speak to those and go down that rabbit hole. Another great feature of ranked choice voting that some states are utilizing is for overseas voters in the military. Oftentimes in primary elections, there could be runoffs, or in general elections, there can be runoffs, and those runoff elections happen so close to those elections that there's not time to send ballots to members of the military overseas. And so states will allow those folks to use ranked choice balloting so that in the runoff election, those ballots can be counted again for, if applicable, a second preference vote that might be cast by somebody in the military. I personally appreciate that because during the 2008 presidential primary, I was actually serving overseas in Fallujah when I was in the Marines, and would have loved to have been able to participate more robustly in elections at that time. So we found a lot of utilization and use for ranked choice in Utah, but in those municipal elections. But I want to shift gears real quick and talk about the partisan primary utilization of ranked choice with our experience in Utah. In 2004, we elected John Huntsman Jr. as governor of Utah, and he actually won the nomination of the Republican Party through a ranked choice election at our statewide convention. So I'm going to share my screen and walk through what that actually looked like from the perspective of counting the votes and determining the winner. Give me a moment here and I'll share my screen.
Please.
Okay, so what you should see here is a visual depiction of, let me move my toolbar here. You'll see a visual depiction of the results, the final results for the Utah Republican Convention nomination for governor. And you'll see John Huntsman's name at the top here. So the way that this worked was all of the voters were given a ranked ballot, and they were able to rank as many up to all of the candidates if they chose. And then what would happen is they would first count the ballots to simply look at everybody's first choice vote and then see how those votes were counted. And so in this case, John Huntsman Jr. was in the lead after that first round of counting. The convenience here was that oftentimes at these convention nomination meetings, there will be multiple rounds of voting. And so they'll give speeches, they'll hand out ballots, count ballots, submit the ballots, and then they'll do the whole process over again and eliminate candidates that did not receive enough votes to move on to the next round. This would take hours and hours and hours. And so rather than do that, you can automate this multiple round of voting, what ranked choice voting calls an instant runoff, where you can conduct a series of instant runoffs between all of the candidates simply using the ranked preferences submitted by the voters. So after this first round, this gentleman, Gary Benson, was eliminated. And so what happens is you look at the ballots where voters placed Gary Benson first, and you see what those voters' second preference was. And so you see a redistribution of votes where the voters that placed Gary Benson first have their second choice vote counted instead for candidates that are still in the running. And so that's where round two goes. Round three is similar. This gentleman, Parley Hellawell, is eliminated. And you see where his second preference votes are reallocated. And then this gentleman, James Hansen, who was a congressman at the time, was eliminated, and then his votes were redistributed. Marty Stevens, our former state speaker of the House, he was eliminated. And now's where the race really starts to make a difference, because you'll notice that when Marty Stevens was eliminated, right now Nolan Karras is in second place and Fred Lampropoulos is in third place. Now, some important political context here, not dissimilar from presidential primaries. Fred Lampropoulos and John Huntsman Jr. are basically the same candidate. They're both political outsiders at this point in history. They're both businessmen. They're both able to well finance their campaigns. They're both very conservative. And so in many ways, there's vote splitting occurring. The type of Republican primary voter that likes John Huntsman also likes Fred Lampropoulos and vice versa. And so in a lot of ways, support that might naturally be for one of those two candidates is split. Nolan Karras is from a different tribe, if you will, within the Republican Party. He came from the legislature. He was very aligned to public school interests and things like that. And so there was some internal division, if you will, within the Republican Party about which candidate they wanted. And this is where you start to see a difference in how these second preference votes start to show coalescing behind candidates. Because as Marty Stevens is eliminated in round 4, in round 5, you now see Fred Lampropoulos is ahead of Nolan Karras. And that's because Marty Stevens was also very conservative, a Chamber of Commerce, businessman type conservative. And so you see some alignment between Marty Stevens, Fred Lampropoulos, and John Huntsman Jr., whereas Nolan Karras and Olene Walker were more aligned to each other. So here, Fred Lampropoulos is slightly in the lead over Nolan Karras for second place in the running. Well, once Olene Walker is eliminated, it won't surprise you, based on what I just said, because of her alignment with Nolan Karras, her votes largely go to Nolan Karras. That's really important because it allows everybody in the Republican primary who has their first favorite candidate but who might align underlying, if you will, with one of the two poles within the Republican division, it allows their vote to not be wasted by putting Olene Walker as their first choice, because they can still have a vote for Nolan Karras when the running gets down to just these last 2 or 3 candidates. So then after that, Nolan Karras is in second place. That becomes really important. And then in round 7, Fred Lampropoulos is eliminated, and John Huntsman Jr. is the winner of the convention. Now, notice that this race is very close between Huntsman and Karras. Under the rules of the Republican Party, there would be a statewide primary runoff between the top 2 vote getters at the convention. John Huntsman would go on to win that primary. But this was a much smoother way to run a nominating contest, because imagine if all of these candidates were in a primary. It could be messy. There would be a lot of strategic voting because people might not want to throw away their vote on a candidate they couldn't win. And so a ranked ballot allows everybody to have their full preference reflected in the outcome of the election without the risk of this sort of wasted vote splitting that can often occur when you have such crowded fields. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my screen there. And I'd like to answer any questions, and if there's more discussion or thoughts that you have about ranked choice voting that I can help address, I'd be happy to do that.
No. Thank you very much, sir. So I am sliding out for a meeting at 2:30 that is a standing, and I am going to hand it off to the ranking member, Representative Waters Evans, who is the lead on the elections bill. So that was a perfect transition there. I appreciate your time very much and insight.
I have questions. So my first question is, our town clerks, I'm also a hockey mom. It's playoffs. It's
Yes,
time.
it is.
We're doing it. So our town clerks in Vermont, administer our elections on a local level. And they are beloved and respected. And also we do not want to overburden them with too much work. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about the transition between, our standard voting system and a ranked choice voting system, and what the burden would be and what the learning curve was like for that, for, a switch for elections administrators, and what your perception is of, how it's going after using it for a period of time.
Yep, great question. So basically, in our system, similar to your system, voters, in our case, there's a lot of vote by mail, but the same is true in our polling locations for in-person voting. Every one of our voters uses paper ballots. Although for the disability community, there are accessible machines that can be used as well. But what that means is that the ballot that the voter looks at, it looks slightly different, because rather than just one bubble next to a list of names and you bubble the one name that you want, there's more of a grid system where you bubble next to the name based on a first choice, second choice, third choice, fourth choice. So our ballot design was slightly different. However, the good news is that ballot design was facilitated by our existing election systems. We didn't need to use a different system. We didn't need to do anything by hand or manually. We didn't have to use any workarounds. We were able to design ranked choice ballots in our existing election system and print ranked choice ballots on paper just like any other normal ballot. When it came to counting the votes, tabulating the ballots, when we received the ballots back from the voters, we used the same equipment, the same optical scanners, the same data system, the same management system. All of the votes are counted automatically by our certified systems, the same way any other ballot would be counted that's not ranked choice. And then what happens when it comes time for the results is that the data file that is the result of the election is very similar to the other data files that our system produces. There's a little bit more data, obviously, because you have ranking data that's incorporated into that. And then we used a software utility that will automate this tabulation process, this winner selection process. So as I explained in my example, where a voter, a candidate is eliminated, and the second choice of that candidate is reallocated to another candidate, et cetera. That process is automated through this software utility. So it didn't take a significant amount of time or manual effort to facilitate that process. It's like all the other things that we do when we prepare results and file reports of the results to the public. We click some buttons and we export a file and we post it on the website and that sort of thing. And all of that was the same. So there was very little difference in what we did, although behind the scenes, how it's done is slightly different. The work burden wasn't significantly different, and in facilitating this implementation wasn't significantly different. The good news for you all when it comes to, let's say, like a presidential primary, which is a statewide election, is that those data files of results of the race, just like other data files, can be sent centrally to the state, to the Secretary of State, to the state elections office, or the state parties, however you facilitate that process, and they can then combine all of the results from the various local jurisdictions to then run this process to show who the statewide winner would be in the case of, let's say, a presidential nomination for the two major parties. So while there are some differences, the differences aren't so significant that it created additional work burden. There are some details that you have to be aware of. You have to make sure that you're following this protocol instead of the other protocol. So certainly it's something that is different. But in terms of the difficulty of implementation or the work burden, it's not significantly different than any other kind of change that might come from time to time. I know in our own jurisdiction, the legislature, God bless them, they're always giving us clerks more things to do, whether it's surveillance cameras at drop boxes or other kinds of rules about elections. We're always implementing slight iterative changes year after year. And this particular change wasn't significantly different from many of those types of changes.
Thank you. Now I wanted to know about another concern I hear frequently when people are asking about ranked choice voting is if it's confusing for the voters, which you touched on a little bit. I'm wondering if you can talk about voter education efforts. I know that you said that, that when you took it to the assisted living facility, they needed no voter education really to figure it out, but how much time, effort, what types of education and outreach were there for voters, and was it, costly? Was it, just can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, another great question. Voter education is always very important, especially if you're going to do anything different in your election administration. And you can spend as much or as little on voter education as you choose. The more you spend, the better outcomes and feelings voters will have. In our case, the statewide Office of Elections made grant money available for cities to educate voters. They largely spent the bulk of that on sending out postcards or mailing flyers to voters, just kind of explaining the process. But we did create content to describe how ranked choice voting works. There were informative videos that were created. Jurisdictions across the country have done this. There's a lot of material out there that you can sort of borrow and use and adapt to your own needs. But I think it's important to have information on your website, or certainly have the political parties put out information. How you design the ballot is important. You want to follow best practices for how the ballot looks and feels to the voter, with clear instructions about the ranking and how they can rank as many candidates as they want, but they should only use one ranking per candidate, and they should only use one ranking once. So there's only one first place winner, or second place vote, et cetera. So yeah, there was a component of education. I think that's important. I think when it comes to spending, you can just spend as much as you want on it. I mean, the more you spend, the more content you can create, the more you can distribute that content. How much is necessary is a different question. That's what we were testing with the assisted living center is the ballot itself intuitive enough that with no instructions, voters can figure it out? And what I think we found is the answer is yes. And when we surveyed voters about whether the instructions were clear and whether the ballot was easy to use, the overwhelming majority said that it was. But I do think it's important to think about creating some basic tutorial videos, having social media content and other website content that explains what ranked choice voting is, how it works. The most important piece of education, I think, is simply helping voters understand that they ought to be encouraged to rank all the candidates that they want to see elected. That while they don't have to rank all the candidates, it's better if they do, and to only use rankings once. There's only one first choice, only one second choice. Now, that is intuitive on the ballot, but sometimes voters try to make statements with their ballot and use it as a commentary rather than as a tool to cast a vote. And so you'll see voters that might do things like rank one candidate first, second, third, fourth, and fifth. That doesn't create a problem because clearly that can just be one vote for that candidate and they don't have any other preferences. But yes, that's a great question. Voter education is important. I think statewide, for our dozen cities or so that utilized ranked choice voting, we spent somewhere in the neighborhood of $50,000 creating and distributing content. The biggest cost really for something like that is paying for the distribution of that content. Creating the content's pretty cheap. Websites are free, videos are easy to make, social media posts are easy to do. But if you're going to send a postcard to voters, that can be expensive. I recommend piggybacking your education efforts on pre-existing mailers that are going out. If you already have voter guides or postcards going to voters about elections, put a link or put some information about ranked choice there. If you're using this in presidential primaries, then it's important to engage the campaigns and the candidates and the parties themselves in educating voters about the ranking process. One of the things that we did hold was a training seminar for candidates so that the candidates and their campaigns understood how the ranking would work, and we gave them information that they could pass on to those that they were talking to, their supporters and whatnot, about how to vote and cast their ballot. And so I think the biggest piece of that is just helping voters understand how the ballot design works and giving them, encouragement to rank all the candidates and rank each candidate only once.
Thank you. Did anyone else? Rep Hooper? Go ahead.
So you're talking about ranked choice voting as if it is one thing, but there are several variations. What actually do you use? Do you use contracept? Do you have precinct mobility? Do you have access to other tools? Have you reviewed?
Great question. So the use cases that we've facilitated in Utah are both single winner and multi-winner, but we use the instant runoff vote method. So we're not using single transferable vote as in like a proportional representation model, although some city councils do that around the country. What we often have is we'll actually have multi-winner majority rule just based on our state law about majority rule for council spots. And so we typically just use the instant runoff method with a majority rule for kind of a single winner. And we might run that sequentially twice to figure out who the two sequential, majority winners would be. We use the ranked choice, what's called RC Tab, Ranked Choice Tabulator, which is an open source utility that can automate the process. And that utility has all those options that you're talking about baked into it. So depending on what type of ranked choice you're utilizing, you can choose those different configurations to produce the winner. And I think you make a good point, which is that ranked choice voting can be thought of quite simply as the way the voter votes, right? They're ranking the candidates. But to your point, how you select the winner can follow a variety of different rules and protocols, like you're talking about with Condorcet, single transferable vote, et cetera. And a lot of those determinations, I think, are made on the back end when you're utilizing the counting utility, the winner selection process, and choosing the configuration that maps to the rules that you're describing.
What product do you use voting machine-wise and program?
We use ES&S, Election Systems and Software, out of Omaha, Nebraska. So we use their system for our ballot design and our ballot printing, and then our ballot optical scan tabulation and management. And then, as I mentioned, we use the RC Tab utility, which is a a free service of the nonprofit Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center. That's an open source utility that can automate the winner selection in ranked choice contests using any one of those configuration options that you select.
Thank you.
All right, any more questions? Yeah, sorry, Rep. Coffin.
Yeah, when you're going through the ranking and as you go round around, do you run into problems with exhausted ballots where ballots get discarded and then those votes don't count?
Yeah,
And
so
has it ever changed an election from somebody who didn't have a majority, all of a sudden they win because ballots were discarded and votes weren't counted?
yeah, great question. So exhausted ballots being ballots where a voter maybe doesn't rank all the candidates. If they only rank one or two or half the field of candidates, then once the candidates that they voted for are no longer in the running, their ballot doesn't have any more preferences left. And so that ballot is exhausted and it isn't used to reapportion votes for any other candidate, right? So another way of thinking about that is like an undervote, which sometimes happens in an election where maybe there's 5 different offices up for an election. You only vote in 2 of the offices and you don't vote in the other ones. It's kind of a similar principle. So every election, we generally do have some exhausted ballots where people have maybe only ranked one candidate or a couple of candidates in a larger field. Generally speaking, when all the votes are counted, the number of exhausted ballots tends to be in the single-digit percent. And oftentimes, leading candidates who were likely to win and ultimately either win or kind of get to the final 2, they tend to have been voted for by most participants. So I've not seen a case where the number of exhausted ballots seemed to be decisive in the outcome. There have been some close races. The closest races have occurred when the candidates that are competitive and likely to win are really similar to other candidates. That tends to be where most of those really close races come in, and then you're really kind of wondering if exhausted ballots makes a difference. That would be an example of like vanilla and French vanilla are both running for city council. It was the closest race ever. Well, of course, because they're very similar, but a lot of times elections tend to be between maybe more polarizing different types of candidates. And so in those races, it tends to be more clear. There's usually wider margins and there's less exhausted ballots because people have a strong preference between those types of different candidates. So yeah, it's a great point. You should always keep in mind exhausted ballots. What we find in our example in city council utilization is that voters have less strong preferences about city politics, and they're less engaged in city politics than they are in national or partisan politics. And so I think you're going to see more exhausted ballots in something like a local nonpartisan race. Our city councils are nonpartisan because people are just less engaged. There's lower turnout, et cetera. In the examples where we've run this in the Republican Party, there's actually a lot less exhausted ballots because you're talking about more engaged voters with stronger preferences. We also administered a presidential caucus in the Virgin Islands for their Republican Party this past cycle, in the 2024 election cycle, and there were very few exhausted ballots there. Because most of the participants were likely to have cast a ballot for one of the 2 leading contenders, which at the time was, President Trump and the South Carolina governor. They were kind of the top 2, and people had strong opinions between those 2 candidates. So I think in the use case where you're looking at presidential primaries, you'll probably end up with a lot fewer exhausted ballots than you'll see in some of the city council races where maybe they've used it, like even in Burlington. Good question.
All right, well, thank you. We are going to have our Director of Elections and Deputy Secretary of State talk about this and some other stuff. You're welcome to stick around on Zoom, but I'm sure you also have a million other things to do.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. That was
Nice to be
so
with you.
useful and informative and entertaining. Thank you.
Take care.
You too. Are you ready?
Ready.
Rep Coffin, do you mind moving Rep Stone's chair over there since she's not here today so they can sit up there together? Thank you so much. I was going to and then thought I might trip over the camera over here and cause all kinds of chaos. So, you would, you're nimble like that? Okay, great.
Good afternoon. For the record, Lauren Hibbert, Deputy Secretary of State.
Sean Sheehan, Elections Director, and Hockey Dad.
Thank you. Yeah, hockey, yeah. It's been quite some time since we've seen you too, so thank you.
You're welcome.
It's been 3 to 6 hours.
If it's okay with this committee, this is a very long bill. There's a lot of components of this bill that we'd like to address. But since you just heard about ranked choice voting, if we could just address the ranked choice voting sections of the bill, that makes sense to us if that works for the committee.
Yes. I hope that you can provide some guidance or suggestions about what would work for your office relating to the bill. I think we're good on the explanations, not that we don't want to hear what you have to say about ranked choice voting and how it works. If there's something you thought we missed, I think we're fairly solid on that. So it can, your perspective and your thoughts on the bill itself are really welcome and of course, yeah.
Well, I will primarily turn that over to Sean, but I will say that ranked choice voting is something that the Secretary of State supports for the presidential primary only at this time, because of the uniqueness of that election. And we support it being implemented for the 2028 election. So, but for the logistics and how it would operate, I'm going to turn to Sean.
Great, thank you. So on that side, I think it's really looking at the way the bill proposes for the 2028 presidential primary. We feel that's appropriate, and passing it in 2025 would be most helpful. We strongly support that. The reason being why we've heard about the challenges or the goals, the work that needs to be done on two folds, both educating voters and the work with clerks to get ready for the process. While we heard from the last witness that it's that's possible and not a bigger change than a lot of the other pieces, we also want to make sure that Vermonters are comfortable, want to make sure that clerks are comfortable. So we feel that by passing in the 2025 session, that allows to establish that long runway for us to then implement the plan. I think it's also important to say that while noting that, that we aren't going to be creating that implementation plan from whole cloth. I think that's probably obvious too from the last witnesses as well. But in addition to the folks in Utah and Alaska, New York City, even our neighbors across northern New England and Maine have also had ranked choice voting for many years. The question often comes up with how it works with hand count towns. They have 150 hand count towns in Maine, and it's worked for them as well. Now, having said that, I think having that time to really work and dig in on those details, how they work, how we'll implement it, will be important.
Yeah, I just wanted to know how many hand count towns are in Vermont.
Roughly 100. And on that side too, I think as the last witness referenced, both the Center for Civic Design and the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center have been helpful both in providing a lot of those materials, which lowers the cost, as they referenced to the mailing being the bigger cost that's remaining. And they've also studied lessons learned about what the most effective way of designing the ballots, as was talked about. So we'd be able to use that lead time to learn from those lessons, design the methods that will work best here. We've spoken to our tabulator vendor, LHS, as the last witness spoke about. They use ES&S. We use Dominion tabulators here in Vermont. But again, they assured us that they'd be able to support the ranked choice voting, and that actually the next generation of tabulators that's coming out with the next certification, they're always evolving, is going to be even more seamless in supporting that process right off. and so I think again that those are the main points that we've seen from this side and for that implementation. I would lastly add one piece that's come up a lot is the issue, I think, that with the last witness spoke about piggybacking on other communication and education that went out. One thing we've heard a lot about, I'm sure you have as well, we've heard from clerks, that the way the current system of voting in Vermont with the different methods, the different, you have to choose a party for the presidential primary. You don't choose a party for the statewide. You statewide primary, you get the 3 ballots, have to return 2 unvoted, and then the general election, universal vote by mail for everybody. That inconsistency has led to, some confusion, some need for voter education. And so certainly I think the opportunity to use that voter education to talk about here are the elections coming up for the year. If you want to get a absentee ballot for all of them, here's how you make the request on my voter page. Get them for the presidential and the statewide primary, letting them know the various dates, letting them know what to expect. It offers a great opportunity to do this piggybacking of voter education on the ranked choice voting that would be coming.
Do you have any opinion, the way the bill stands at the moment, it's repealing on July 1st, 2029, this one presidential primary thing, is that?
Yeah, we oppose that section. We feel that just in general significant changes to election procedures and election law shouldn't be run as a pilot. I think if there's going to be made that effort of recognizing that ranked choice voting is a more robust way of participating in democracy, I think we can all appreciate how much Vermonters like robust democracy, and we're on the eve of town meeting day where we are very robust, that making those kinds of significant changes shouldn't be done as a pilot, and repealing it would be sending a signal that automatically repealing it would be sending a signal that it is a pilot. So I think rather than our recommendation, and we'll put this in written feedback for the bill as well, is to strike those sections that talk about the automatic repeal. Instead, we could be directed to give a report, say in 2029, about how ranked choice voting went in 2028. We'd be happy to provide that. Certainly, we'd be looking at evaluating what happened with the change anyhow. If the committee and if the legislature more broadly, didn't like it, wanted to repeal at that stage or make changes or anything else, there certainly would be ample time, given that the next presidential primary wouldn't be until 2032.
Sure, and we have the ability to do so. The village, we can always take it back.
Correct.
Yes. I am wondering also, what was my other question? Gosh, it's Friday afternoon, I apologize. This was my question. So is the goal maybe there isn't a goal, but would you say that the goal for trying this out as a presidential primary ballot is to slowly incorporate it into other ways of voting for Vermonters as
I'll
time
answer
passes?
that one. Maybe is the answer. We want to see how it goes at the presidential level, and I think the report that we would recommend to this committee as opposed to the repeal should have an analysis of should this be expanded to other races. There's probably races where it makes good sense. The reason why the Secretary of State supports it for this particular race is Vermonters are extremely independent and don't always fall within the national party's mindset. So as we all know, Nikki Haley won the Vermont primary. And there may have been a second contender that would have been useful to the national party in the Republican primary, that would have told the Republican party where, if Nikki Haley's not the candidate, who's the next best candidate for Vermont. And that type of nuance is better served by ranked choice voting than just having to pick one candidate. And as you've heard from the previous witness, when you just have to pick one candidate, you make a strategic decision on who you think is going to be able to win. Whereas if you're able to rank your candidates, you are able to choose your true and first best choice, and then choose the next best people for you. So it gives more a more nuanced way for voters to vote in this particular national primary. Should that continue on to other races? I think that depends on several factors. One, how logistically it works. But two, ranked choice voting works really well when there's a lot of options. And for many of our races, there's not a lot of options. So it's something to consider.
Thanks, Rep. Handel.
Can you tell me if there wasn't a repeal, how that kind of compressed time frame between the primary and the general election would work if ranked choice voting were to continue to the general election?
It would not, because the way the law is written right now, Representative, is it's only for the presidential primary in 2028. It does not extend to the general election. So if the law was enacted now, we'd hold a ranked choice voting in the presidential primary of 2028, and assuming it was not repealed, in the presidential primary of 2032, and then the presidential primary of 2036. But it would not extend to the general election.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. Thank you.
Any other questions? We have like 15 more minutes, maybe 10 minutes. Do you think if you could take a bite out of the second bite of the apple issue? Are you prepared to address that, or the fusion candidate, hybrid candidate?
Yes, we
Do you have
can.
a position on that? Or, yeah.
We do not have a position on that,
Okay.
so it's very easy for us to
Okay,
address it.
all right, that's not even 10 minutes.
And I think our preference would be to come back to talk about the remainder of the bill in a more comprehensive way, if that works, just because
Sure.
we'll get into like 7 minutes of it, and then it's a 32-page bill. So we'd really like to come back in front of your committee and address the remaining sections of the bill all in one chunk, if possible.
Yes, we'll see you when we get back after our break next week. Hopefully we can come back and address the rest of it.
If you want a preview of our opinions,
Yeah, think about over the next week.
yes, if you don't have anything else to do.
Yeah.
Our director Sheehan did a really excellent PowerPoint, so you can sort of see the themes of what's happening in the elections bill and our positions on all the topics that are within this bill, and also some written testimony that goes into more detail of why we're asking for specific changes or why we're not asking for specific changes, section by section. So if you want to fall asleep at night or it's really boring.
Wow, that would be
We have print copies here. There's also the electronic version is posted on the committee page.
It is on our committee, is it on our committee page now?
Yes, it's currently on the committee page.
Not being very flattering with your song.
Yes. Another question, I know this is only my second biennium here, and I know that we addressed this and had these conversations last time. Do you know how many prior years this has come up, this issue of ranked choice voting and
I think I think it's been part of the conversation for quite some time, but I think it's been the last 2 bienniums where there's been an actual bill, and the most significant movement occurred in 2022. But there was a bill in 2020, but there also was a pandemic in 2020, so things got a little derailed.
Yeah, Rep. Coffin.
Do you know if any of the states that have enacted ranked choice voting, have they then decided this doesn't work for us and repealed it? Or has everybody kept it and been happy with it?
I think for the change, I defer to other witnesses and maybe folks from the Ranked Choice Voting Center could explain. I know there is a lot of literature out there about the experiences of states and voters in those states and the public opinion of those. But yeah, that would be a piece we can either come back with or bring another witness on.
Yeah, I was just asking because since you said that Secretary of State's office supports this, that there would be that answer.
Yeah,
That was the only reason I
enough.
asked. Mhm.
In my research, I don't know of any community that has repealed it, but I don't want to answer that definitively without researching it.
Okay.
Alaska.
Oh, I don't know.
Tried.
I think there's been efforts to repeal it, but whether it actually has been repealed, I just don't want to speak off the cuff.
Okay, no, I'm just trying to learn.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It's a great question.
Alright, did anyone else have any questions? Concerns? Thank you. It's been a long day for you, Ops. You are much appreciated.
You've been here a lot today.
Well, I was smarter today and this afternoon that I brought my water bottle, but was I smart enough to bring it up to the table? No.
Well, you're good. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Alright,
you.
and we are scheduled for 3:00, I believe. Maybe 3:05 because I think I asked if we could take a little break. We've been sitting here for a while. So we are going to be back, if you could be back in 10 minutes. We're gonna finish up the technical corrections bill.